Now that you're all awake, I think it's time for the main speech. To do that, we have our member, Bob Watt. Bob's career has spanned not only the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, but the Boeing Company. Bob?
I'm very pleased to introduce to you one of Washington, D.C.'s most effective leaders. Please give a warm Seattle 4 and Vancouver welcome to Marion Blakey.
Whoa, Bob, what an introduction. And I'll tell you, looking around this room, I can tell I'm in a crowd of friends because I am delighted to be able to speak with you all today. And I have to tell you, Professor Jim, I've spoken before a few lunch audiences, but never one with this kind of fine voice. Man, the sing-along here, absolutely wonderful. And of course, with this accent, John, I suspect you do suspect that I am part of Washington's temperature and inefficiency, but I'll try to put that thought aside. But it is great to be here with Seattle 4. I have to tell you, Seattle Rotary 4 is a storied group. And having had a lot of Rotarians in my family, I know that what is behind the work you do is tremendous public service. So I want to thank you for that at the very outset and tell you how privileged I am to be with you today. For many of us in the aviation industry, there is no place more exciting than Seattle. And Bill, when I heard the plans you've got for the port, I'll tell you, I'm always throw my shoulders back a little further when I come through SeaTac, and the exciting plans you have on the freight front, as they say, we all count on you all delivering on that. Because I do believe this community shows great leadership for the entire country on issues that are critical to the ongoing success and competitiveness of our industry writ large, and particularly the aerospace industry. It's an industry I have been a part of for decades, and I want to thank Bob for chronicling that. But I'm very proud of that and very proud of representing so many of the companies that make this area so important to our country's future. Before I get to a couple of issues I do want to touch on today, I'd like to briefly mention some local news that I found particularly inspiring. Even in Washington, D.C., we can get excited by something like the groundbreaking for the Highland School District's new aviation high school. I thought that was terrific. A state-of-the-art facility that holds a promise of becoming a permanent breeding ground for the kind of talent we desperately need for the United States to remain competitive. I know Jim Albaugh was here just a few months ago talking to you, and I bet he told you about the enormous challenge that he faces with regard to retiring engineers. Bob knows 56% of Boeing's engineers are 50 years old or older, and most will become eligible for retirement in 5 years. So who's going to replace them? If everything goes according to plan, kids who graduate from the aviation school right here in Seattle are going to be a big part of the solution to Jim's challenge and the challenge for our industry writ large. Now, another piece of news involves Senator Patty Murray. During National Aerospace Week on Capitol Hill this week, she accepted the Wings of Liberty Award. This is an award that AIA gives. And by the way, AIA is a 94-year-old trade association, so there's a lot of venerable in these awards. But this is one that we give to a member of Congress each year who has made significant contributions to the aerospace industry over a long period of time. Senator Murray has shown a steadfast commitment to jobs, the environment, innovation, the future of the aerospace industry. So I have to say a tip of the hat to her. And those are some of the very same issues that I'd like to just touch on for a moment with you today. For our industry to thrive, to create jobs, to compete on a global scale, to protect the environment, it's going to take a real commitment from all of us. Many of you probably know I feel like there's a little bit of coals to Newcastle in this, but I'll tell you anyway. The aerospace and defense industry employs more than 1 million workers. We support 2.9 million middle-class, high-paying jobs across all 50 states. Sales of $331 billion bolster communities all over the country. Aerospace sales alone account for a $77.5 billion export total, and that provides our economy with a $51 billion foreign trade surplus, the largest of any manufacturing sector. So given these facts, you'd think our government would do a better job of safeguarding aviation, especially during a recession. But as Bill Ayer of Alaska, I think, told you all a few meetings back, our airlines are exorbitantly taxed, and they tend to be an easy mark for Congress. And he rightly pointed out that getting our leaders in Washington to act, or at least do no harm, it's one of the biggest challenges facing our industry and my organization today. Unfortunately, this message hasn't been heard. More than once, our president has attacked business aviation as being a toy for corporate executives, when exactly the opposite is the truth. This important sector of our industry supports thousands of American jobs and helps small businesses across the country to operate more efficiently and get out to their plants and their customers. You know, I'll tell you, this one was another one that really rolled me back. On Monday of this week, the President proposed a new surcharge on the airlines of $100 a flight, $100 a segment, to pay for his jobs plan. Putting another tax on the back of a beleaguered industry that underpins this economy isn't the answer to solving our nation's debt. But boy, I'll tell you, it is hard to get those messages across in Washington. To advance well-informed decisions on the budget debates, including ones that will clearly stretch into our future, the Aerospace Industries Association has launched a campaign to explain the critical role of aerospace and defense in the welfare and the future of our nation. Reflecting that role, the campaign is called Second to None. Second to None is an industry-wide effort to stand as one, speak with one voice, and bring our combined resources to bear on behalf of some of the great job creators in our country. So we're holding events, doing interviews, placing op-eds, staging rallies, and going in large numbers up to Capitol Hill to tell the story. We recently launched the campaign's website, secondtonone.org. And I happen to tell you, this call to arms isn't an exclusive plea. Each and every one of you in this room is very welcome to join us. And our message is this: we've got to all shoulder the responsibility to reduce the debt. But let's make sure that we don't make ill-considered cuts that will have unintended consequences. We've got a great story to tell, and it's time that the right people heard it. Second to None is a major initiative with many different components, but let me just touch on three here today that are critical to the future of our industry. And here I'm focusing on civil and commercial aviation. They're first, the full funding of the next generation air transportation system, NextGen. Second, a multi-year FAA reauthorization bill. And third, something that I think is particularly important by the companies that are represented here, a smart environmental initiative that will keep us competitive. First, full funding of NextGen. Our current air traffic control system has been compared to a series of traffic lights at busy intersections. And of course, in many parts of the country, it's rush hour all the time. And you would think that with something as complex and important as air traffic management, you'd want something at least as accurate as the GPS that's in your car. But it's not the case. And our current air traffic control system, our radars aren't anywhere near as accurate as the GPS that's in your car. And traffic isn't going to let up anytime soon. I know it's hard to believe because we've been through a slump here, but let me tell you, according to the International Air Transport Association, and this is why Bill's so right in focusing on international connections, there will be 3.3 billion air travelers by the year 2014. That's 800 million more than who flew on the world's major airlines in 2009. NextGen is the solution. NextGen lays a foundation that will continually improve and accommodate future needs of air travel while strengthening the economy with one seamless global sky. It's all about satellites. It's all about the amazing ability to use technology to really move us incredibly efficiently. For fewer funds than we've committed to high-speed rail, we could fully equip the entire U.S. civil fleet and do it in less than 3 years, generating 156,000 direct and indirect jobs. Experts say with an equipped fleet and a federal commitment to accelerate the supporting ground infrastructure, NextGen could be totally in place in the next 5 to 8 years, instead of the planned 10 to 15. That means NextGen's efficiency, the improvements there, would begin eating away at, get this, the $40 billion that we're experiencing right now in lost economic activity because of today's antiquated air traffic control system. Sounds great. So why isn't it getting done? It leads me to the second issue I wanted to touch on, and that is a multi-year FAA reauthorization. 4 years ago this week, the last multi-year FAA reauthorization expired, and last week Congress passed the 22nd short-term extension. This one extends FAA's operating authority and taxing authority 4.5 months. This does almost nothing but inject uncertainty into the marketplace and put a lot of great plans on hold. And these extensions come with real consequences. Political wrangling over the 21st extension, a dispute that had absolutely nothing to do with FAA's responsibility to provide safe air transport, caused a nearly 2-week shutdown this summer. Thousands of FAA workers were furloughed, and thousands of construction jobs around the country were put on hold, and the FAA lost $400 million in revenue. That's pretty shocking in these financial times. That's your government at work, my government at work. And it's no way to run an agency that is responsible for millions of people flying safely every day. This unprecedented delay in modernizing the statutes that govern the oversight and operation of the most complex air transportation authority in the world does have numerous side effects. New starts, prohibited. Programs are not anchored to a long-term financial authority, and new concepts and technologies are held back while other nations march forward. President Obama has spent a lot of time in the last few weeks challenging Congress to pass his new $447 billion jobs bill, and it's already become a polarizing piece of legislation because of the kind of plans to pay for it. Instead, with a commitment to FAA authorization that includes innovative financing that would accelerate and make the business case for NextGen equipage, procedures, infrastructure, we could put more than 150 people to work now while improving our country's critical transportation infrastructure, which is one of the President's key goals. The third and last issue I'd like to touch on is the competitiveness of our country and pair it with the environment. The reason I bundled them together is that for too long these issues have been viewed as being mutually exclusive. But it's never been the case in the aviation industry, which has a storied tradition of innovation in pursuit of both efficiency and clean skies. You can go back as far as 1958, when Boeing launched the 707. I'm not going to ask anybody in this room to admit that you remember the debut of Pan Am's transatlantic service. But believe me, it's worth recalling that the 707 was known, in the words of aviation historian Jay Spencer, as an aircraft that assaulted aerodromes, rattled windows, and smeared the sky with dark, sooty trails. The engineers in this room can tell you that the reason that the 707 had that reputation was the turbojet engines. The engines accelerated a small amount of air to a very high velocity, but they were very inefficient at low speeds. It wasn't until 1960 that a better idea came along. That was the turbofan, which moves a much larger volume of air more slowly through the engine for better acceleration and much better fuel efficiency. Fast forward to today. The average jetliner uses 70% less fuel per passenger. And we didn't stop there. The tradition continues with the 787 Dreamliner, which is so efficient it uses 20% less fuel than any other aircraft of the same size. And a new Deloitte study looking at the system overall estimates that NextGen will save 3 billion gallons of fuel and eliminate 29 metric tons of carbon emissions every year. Up-and-coming renewable aviation fuels will boost our environmental efficiency in a big way just as well. Just recently, the Department of Energy made up a $4 billion grant to Boeing, the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and the Port of Seattle to accelerate the solutions to drive down the cost of biofuels production, the holy grail of a drop-in biofuel that can be used in the same way we do Jet A today. But it isn't just aircraft efficiency that's needed to make our industry green. It's also about how those aircraft are flown and how they get to where they're going, which brings me back to NextGen. Here's what won't work. The European Emissions Trading Scheme, called ETS. Have many of you in the room heard of this? Because this is a bit of a sleeper, I'll tell you. It's going to cost the industry an estimated $3.5 billion by 2020. Under this plan by the European Union, every single flight to or from Europe would have to pay a fee for each ton of carbon emitted during a flight, and that's beginning next year, 2012. To add insult to injury, the funds collected under ETS don't even go to a trust fund for the environment. They go straight to the general funds of the countries that collect the fees. Look, by itself, emissions trading is not necessarily a bad idea, but imposing it unilaterally on a global industry that's already as fuel efficient as is technologically possible, and believe me, it's certainly in our self-interest to be, that's a terrible idea. Thankfully, the international community is rising in unison to oppose it. I think we can all agree that now's not the time to impose such a radical approach that will ultimately cost billions of dollars and sacrifice thousands of jobs as well. The best way to encourage environmental protection is to reward innovation. The government didn't regulate away the 707's noisy and inefficient engines. Boeing engineers figured it out all by themselves, and they made a better airplane. While companies like those here in Seattle are building better airplanes, our national leaders and policymakers need to start thinking ahead. And we need to help them understand how technological advancements are going to change the way we fly, how we manage our traffic, and how our competitive standing in the global marketplace, they've got to defend it. Our job at AIA is to ensure that our leaders in Washington are doing just that, leading. It's a tall order at a time of seemingly indiscriminate calls for program cuts, tax increases, and more regulation. In the early days of flight, our industry struggled what had then been seen as an insurmountable threat. You may think I'm referring to high fuel prices, tariffs, burdensome regulations. The threat was fog. It was a disorienting and deadly foe in an era before accurate instrumentation. So imagine what it must have been like on Mitchell Field in New York, September 24th, 1929, lifting off in a blanket of fog in the world's first blind flight. Jimmy Doolittle. Jimmy Doolittle steps aboard a Navy Consolidated NY-2. It was outfitted with an assortment of never-before-seen gadgets, including a new altimeter that had been invented just a year early by, get this, a Manhattan watchmaker. And it had a runway homing indicator that relied on 2 vibrating reeds to find the center line. Doolittle completes a 10-minute flight using these new instruments, ground radio operators, and radio beacons. He lands safely. But Mother Nature wasn't with him. The fog was already starting to lift. So much for the blind flight. So what does he do? He does it again. And this time with a solid hood over the cockpit and some official observers, pretty brave ones, on board, to demonstrate that the first flight wasn't some kind of fluke. 4 years later, when Boeing incorporated these innovations into a 10-passenger Model 247 for United Airlines, the company was so proud that one of its major ads showed an employee posing for a promotional picture with the instrument panel on her lap. It's inspiring to think of Doolittle's courage, Boeing's pride, and all the innovators that helped create the industry we represent today, many of whom are right here in this room, contributing, ways large and small, to a community that is still the beating heart of aviation in America, right here. So my commitment to you is that we'll continue to do our best to convey that pride to our leaders who need to know what we already take for granted about an industry that's helping to build a better future for all of us and keep us second to none. Thank you for having me here.
We have time for questions. Jan and Mark.
Mr. Ralph Monroe.
Neither of you speakers talked about the thing we hate at the airport. That's the security. We're sick of the lines. Why can't you speed that up?
You know, I'll tell you, one of the best things that happened to me was I came into FAA in 2002 right at the point that TSA and Homeland Security went somewhere else. So I have to tell you, I can't offer all of the solutions on that front. I will say this, though, that if we do it right, this next-gen system will embed the kind of security network in it that should make it not just a question of gate to gate and how long does that take, but really from your home to your destination. If we have the right kind of information network and we link it to the right people with the right kinds of intelligence, it could make an enormous difference. I can't give you the solutions for the machines that are holding us up at the airport right now, although I'll tell you, a lot of the manufacturers are our members. But I can tell you that there is a very hopeful future if we do it right.
As long as you're handling softball questions. Would you comment on the Boeing South Carolina situation?
Just getting warmed up here. I'll tell you, I think we were all quite shocked. The idea that the National Labor Relations Board would overreach in this way into the private sector's ability to determine where facilities and plants are located really did just roll like a shudder through Washington. It's one of those things that I think, as we explain over and over again, that this is not a question of moving jobs, of taking jobs away. It, in fact, was a new facility creating jobs. But again, it goes right back to the heart of business's ability to determine for itself what the future should be. I'm encouraged, frankly, by the fact that the House has passed a bill that basically says thou shalt not do that as a regulatory appointed body. I also believe that Boeing will prevail in court. But something else to remember, they could just as well have taken those jobs out of the country and overseas, and they didn't do it. So it's something I think we all need to point out, and they would not have been able to be challenged for that.
Bob Alexander.
Thank you very much for your explanation. I still don't quite understand why the FAA authorization can't get through Congress. Is there some political explanation for it as opposed to financial? And does it have anything to do with closing those little teeny airports in Nevada?
Oh, yes, there are a few little political problems there. And that's the reason I stress that, you know, the responsibility I had at FAA is all about safe flight. It's all about the efficiency of the system. There are a number of things that really fall into the category of political and economic aspects of the system that really aren't FAA's responsibility. They fall on the Department of Transportation, to tell you the truth. The one you're talking about is something called essential air service. I can make the case for you on both sides of this because back in 1978, when we deregulated the aviation system and let everyone go where the market chose to as airlines, there was a real concern that small airports would dry up. Nobody would serve them. And so a subsidy was put in place. It was supposed to be last for 10 years. Well, that was 1978. It not only continued, but it has grown. And there are some pretty shocking subsidies per seat, per person, as high as $1,400 a person. I mean, you know, we could fly them on a private aircraft for that. So that issue is a live one, and in the current budget environment in Washington, that was a very tough problem. There's also a labor issue that has to do, you know, with the way airlines are organized in terms of what act they fall under. That also has been a very hot one. And to be honest with you, you know, how much money? There has been a discrepancy between the House and the Senate. Now, I'll tell you, very good news just yesterday, the Senate fully funded NextGen. Not a lot of other things that should be dear to our hearts in this room, but they did fully fund NextGen.
You're doing so well. One last softball question. A lot of our flyers are really getting a little fatigued with respect to the incremental fees from the airlines in general. Is there a balance to be struck between the good old days of a highly regulated but fairly efficient and comfortable system versus the free market approach now and the pain that that's causing?
You know, I think you're hitting on something that really is important, because people don't like to be what starts out as nickel and diming and then it's, you know, buck, 25 bucks and on it goes. I do think that has been a problem for our carriers. The fact of the matter is that there are only a couple of our carriers at this point that have made any money over the last 10 years. I mean, it really is kind of shocking. And part of it has to do with the fact that the fares themselves are inherently low. I know it seems hard to believe, but when you adjust for inflation, there's been almost no increase in the price of a ticket. You know, people say, why in the world would anyone go into the airline business? And there are times when I wonder too. Stephen Udvar-Harsey, you know, who has made quite a career in leasing, said everyone makes money in the aviation system except the airlines. Everyone. So it's a tough business, and I do think that some streamlining on that, some attention to passenger concerns. I will have to say, and you heard, I'm on the board of Alaska, so I speak with a little bit of, I'm sure, partisanship here. But I was very proud of the fact that when the fees stopped, the taxes and fees that were on the ticket, almost every carrier except Alaska jumped their fares up. Not a bit of it went back during that period of time to people who fly. Alaska didn't. Alaska dropped those fees, and they did not appear on the ticket in any increase in fare. So I think some attention to, you know, what is right for passengers is needed, but I don't think it's the regulatory hand of government telling the carriers what to do every time they turn around.
Bob touched on this briefly in the introduction, but I think we really soft-pedaled something that's quite extraordinary. The record for aviation safety is just through the roof. It's so phenomenally, extraordinarily good. And, you know, it's easy for you to lay out all the improvements that need to be made to not only maintain but improve that. But, you know, the accomplishment that we've done is extraordinary. Your background goes beyond aviation, and I wonder if you could comment how we could bring some of those improvements into our freight mobility safety and into our highway safety. You know, if we could even just incrementally approach the improvements in highway safety that you've achieved in aviation safety, it would just make a difference and saved lives that's almost incalculable.
I can't thank you enough for that being the last question here, because you are obviously hitting on something that is nearest to my heart and career. Yes, there are certainly safety improvements that can be made. The aviation industry has been remarkable in the way it has dropped the risk in flying to an almost incalculable level. Certainly part of it is technology. A lot of it is also going to training and the kind of rigor that is applied in aviation. Even there, 70% of the accidents are human factors. When you start looking over other modes of transportation, it all goes to the issue of changing human behavior. Now, positive train control to get more distance and more reliability in terms of freight rail, absolutely. I could start talking to you about some of the technologies that are going on to cars that really are, I think, worth paying for as consumers. They're very important. But at the end of the day, it really is trying to change the way people behave. And of course, when you add the multiplicity of people and factors in that, we've got a lot of work to do. But thank you for recognizing aviation's record, and thank you for having me here.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.